Welcome to episode 6 of Amazing People. Today I have Mr. Alex Streit. He is a software entrepreneur. And we're going to talk about everything from business to leadership to what it is to be a great employee and a great human. We're going to talk about tips for success and probably a good bit about science and technology. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome my guest. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here.
So to begin with, can we get a little bit about your background? I know you have some roots in Switzerland. You spent some time in Australia. What was that all about?
Yeah, you wouldn't expect this for someone who ended up doing what I did in life, but the first 6 years of my life were spent in a house that didn't have electricity and was built high in the Swiss Alps. And then when I was approximately 6.5, my life changed pretty dramatically because my parents moved to the U.S., to the Midwest, and my father took a postdoctoral position at UIUC, which is up in Illinois, in Champaign-Urbana. And that university that's one of the research centers for where, NCSA, the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, that's where things like Mosaic and the modern World Wide Web was, very, very formative. And so I went from being surrounded by essentially a whole slew of animals and picturesque scenery
and no electricity.
And no electricity to suddenly there was space and rockets and computers and a completely altered perception of what is possible. And I think it heavily shaped how I viewed our potential as humans and what we could achieve.
When computers continue to automate and do faster and better certain rote tasks that humans historically and up till this day have done, there will be societal shifts from the standpoint of people losing their jobs and things like that, which is a cause of worry and concern for a lot of people, given that large sectors of the economy will be displaced. Now, the way I look at it is that while it's always not cool to see someone lose their job and maybe relocate their family and things like that, but at the same time, it does lead to that person needing to develop their skills at a higher level to then end up contributing something that a computer cannot do. And that may mean that they need to tap into those creative potentials within themselves that they formerly could not get into because they were doing rote work. So in that way, it will be tough short-term transitions, but I think we're headed for a long-run betterment.
Yeah, it is tough. You never want to disrupt anyone's livelihood globally. Nobody wants to have someone's livelihood taken away, and I don't necessarily think that computers do that, but I agree that automation shifts the way that work is needed, and we've seen that historically with everything that we have done. You invent a better hammer, and now the people that used to operate the previous hammer are going to be out of a job. And I think it is a very important challenge for us as a society and as a race to be aware of that we cannot leave the people behind because they have learned a skill of a certain level. This skill is something that's critically useful in a previous pattern. And what I think the tendency is to say, well, you know what, we don't need this skill anymore. What we need now is we need for you to just be creative and change and think. And I don't think that's fair. I think that's
it's definitely simplistic.
Yeah, I think that's what has led to a lot of feelings of people being left out. And a lot of, we see this often in elections, that kind of more simplistic ideas of bringing back older jobs appeals to people. Well, part of it is because these people are being told, what you did is no longer relevant or important, and that's not fair. That's not a good way of approaching it. And if you just dismiss them and kind of say, well, you should change everything you're doing, that's not right. Because here's the thing, here's fundamentally the thing. When people operate their job, they learn sequences of how to do things. They get up, they do this, they do it, and they follow this, and they get to work, they follow these steps. And a better way of dealing with this is to take these steps and seeing if we can adjust them to another job industry. So rather than saying, okay, you know what, you're a coal miner, bad luck, start over, how do we take the procedures that they are used to following and adapt them so they can apply those same procedures in new ways, in new places, and maybe bring some of the new industries that are coming in into these areas where these people are, so they can then very comfortably shift from where they were to where they are. And I think that's kind of a key point, is rather than making humans learn how the computer works, which is a very common thing, and we see that all the time in software that's poorly designed, we should design the software to adapt to the humans. Well, that's the same with jobs. We should design our job needs around what humans are naturally already doing, and that way people are much more highly skilled and able to follow into these new jobs. One of the formative experiences that happened was that, so my mother is Australian, that's part of the Australian connection, and so we went and visited Australia, and up until this point I had very little idea where Australia even was. It was not something that I had regularly encountered at all. And
well, real quick, we hardly hear about Australia.
Right.
You hear about it, but it's so far away from America and Europe.
It is very far away, and it's not in the public spotlight very often. So it's understandable that as a 9-year-old you wouldn't have really thought much of it. But we went because my mother decided that it was time that we understood where she had come from, and so we traveled through Southeast Asia, and we went Thailand and Singapore, Malaysia. We traveled through a bunch of these countries, but we didn't travel
making your way down.
Right, and we didn't travel in like 5-star luxury. We traveled in more of like a barefoot, get out into the wilderness kind of travel style. So we really saw the countries. We didn't stay in the capitals. We didn't stay. We really got out and would get guides to take us way out and go into various different parts of the country. And so I got to see a lot of things very differently, because up until this stage, I'd seen Europe, I'd seen Western Europe, I'd seen Switzerland, I'd seen the U.S., the Midwest of the U.S. We traveled all around the U.S., so I saw lots of different parts of the U.S. But essentially, I'd seen these types of areas, and it was very different visiting central Malaysia in the late 80s. It was a different experience that I saw a lot of things that changed, again, my perspective. And one of the foundational things that I saw was that there was a bridge, and the bridge had cars driving across it, a regular bridge like you'd see anywhere else in the world. But underneath the bridge, it was just littered with debris, plastic and all sorts of stuff, and muddy banks. And playing in the litter were children.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And above, and then you could sort of see these makeshift kind of places they lived. And above their house, their makeshift house made out of bits of plastic, was a huge, gigantic Coca-Cola sign, angled towards the bridge so that all the cars could see this. And as a 9-year-old kid, I looked at that and I watched the kids and I was like, okay, how come they are where they are and I'm up here on this bridge traveling along by car? Like what chance of nature separates that person's existence from the one that I've had? How have I been able to travel and this is where they live? And I came to the conclusion that there's nothing special about me. It's not that I am somehow gifted. It's more that by chance I have a better step up a ladder. And so it was this very weird feeling for a 9-year-old to have, but I had this sudden feeling that if I didn't go on and try to do something meaningful with life, then that was almost like an insult to that kid who, if they were in my position, might have done more. And it's hard to describe, but it was this overwhelming sense that it would be ungrateful of me not to pursue my dreams. It would be ungrateful of me not to try to do something.
It was probably an emptying of your own self in a way at that time, like just a complete humility based on seeing something that, in a way, it puts you in awe.
It shook me very, very profoundly. It shook me, as you say, because there was no way that I, as a 9-year-old, had sufficient words to reason this conundrum. How is it that I have so much and they have so little? How can this be? And what becomes of that? Like what choices do I make that I've made due to privilege? I just didn't have the language to even explore the problem properly. But I was hit and struck by the sense that if I was going to do something based on the fact that I was privileged enough to be up on the bridge and not down on the riverbank, I should strive to try and do something meaningful.
And I think that given that corporations hold such a power, not just over what happens in the world, but how people live their lives, because a lot of people, 120 million people in the US work at a corporation, big or small. I think corporate leadership can start implementing that to achieve the goals that they set out, which can allow those things to be achieved more effectively, whilst creating the personal developments within the people who work for them and they themselves. And I think that will be, I think a radical shift in how things work and a radical improvement in how much stuff gets done and how good people feel about it.
Yeah. I don't know, corporations are made out of people, and I don't know that corporations are the sole people, but they're definitely sole parts of that equation.
Change,
but
yeah.
I definitely think that they have a role to play. I think corporations are formed out of people, though, so it's really the people that are in the corporations that can affect that kind of impact and change. I think where technology plays a key role, and where at least I'd like to focus my time, is in allowing us to remove a lot of the resisting parts of our lives that cause us to not achieve things. And when I was younger, I used to liken this to circles and lines. Right? There are many tasks that you can do on a daily basis that essentially form a circle, because when you're done, you're essentially back where you started. Right? And this one example is, you can clean your desk, you can rearrange stuff, you can go through your email, and you're essentially just kind of circling back to where you were. And you can do this for 2 weeks. You can sit there and feel busy.
We're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl year after year, running over the same old ground. From Wish You Were Here.
Right.
Pink Floyd song.
So that's a circle. A line is anything that you do where after you've finished, it's moved you slightly. And in our lives, we're going to have lots of circles. There are things, dishes need to be done, and then you need to eat. So the dishes need to be done, but then you need to eat. And it's an eternal circle. You're always going to have to do dishes, and you're always going to have to eat. So that's a circle that's forever going to exist. But you could do that your whole life and nothing else, and you would be where you started. Whereas if you pick up a book, or you take a course, or you sit down to write, or you do any of these things, it might be a minute, but it is a small increment. And then the next time you're doing a circle, but it's now starting at a different point. So the important part is to understand in your life, how many of these circles have you got? How many of these circles, because we often create circles because they're easy, right? Our brains, we can switch our brains off and start to just follow the circle.
Habituation.
So we can go into work and we can spend the whole day scanning through our emails, rereading the same emails, moving emails between folders, filing a bunch of things. All these
Personally
circles.
changing, not at all.
Correct.
Not improving, yeah.
Not advancing anything else, so that we return back to our state that we were in before. But if we even fit just 1 hour, if you look at that and you go, I have a lot of circles, I don't have a lot of lines, I'll fit in 1 hour a day somewhere, or half an hour a day, it doesn't really matter the increment, on a line, then over time, progressively, you'll go somewhere, right?
Guaranteed.
Guaranteed. Something will change. And books is a great one, obviously, but it can be gym, it could be walking around the block once a day, right? Something, whatever it is, something simple, small. If you take an elevator, it's a circle. If you take the steps, it's a line. It's just all these little things that add up that you can go through your life and go, well, I know how to reduce a bunch of circles. I know how to reinforce and expand upon the lines that I'm drawing. And ultimately, that's one way that you can shift without dramatic change. You can start to shift where you end up over the course of time. Of course, habits are always difficult to break, and we often feel the need to make a dramatic break. All right, January 1st.
Done.
I'm
just done, whatever it is.
Whatever
I'm
it
done.
is, I'm going to go to the gym, or whatever. We have to make these dramatic declarations and things. But really, if you look at it just as a circle line problem, you'll actually find there's lots of small little circles that hang around all the time. I'm going to go on my phone and look at some social media, circle, right? It's very easy to just try to evaluate these things. So I think that's one of the things that we can do is just every day.
Yeah, as a people, irrespective of corporations, and yeah, right.
Exactly.
Well, and the effect is more happiness for the person who does it. It's not. I don't want to use a computer term, but it's not efficient to just keep going in circles. But to use a more human term, it's not happiness inducing. It's stale. It's like stale bread. You can eat it. It's not good for your spirit. It's not good for your body. It's not good for your tongue. Yet it's safe and it's comfortable and it's easy, and that's pretty much all it is.
Right. And sometimes those structures are no longer appropriate now, but very appropriate then. A classic example is, Sony, the company, when Akira Morita passed. He was the founder and the big boss at Sony, and so after he passed, they got a new big boss, but that big boss never dared change anything. If Akira had said, we need to have this type of distribution structure, then that's how it was. And basically the company just froze in time and nothing changed because nobody dared change what had been set before. So they had to end up bringing out an outsider, someone from outside Japan to come in who didn't have the respect needed for the hierarchy that pre-existed, right? So that's an example of where sometimes we overassume.
As a result, what happened to Sony?
So they had to bring in Howard Stringer to come in and change everything and basically smash down the old ways of things, because those things made sense when Morita designed them. They made sense because it fit the market. But then as the market shifted and he was no longer there to make the changes, they started to no longer fit. And so now there was a distribution model that assumed that planes were a certain price and ships were a certain price, for example. That was no longer true, but we were, as Sony, would be stuck in that model. And so we do the same thing in society. That's just a very micro example of a quick how something can be created and then people take it to be unchangeable. And so there's all these adages like rules are made to be broken and all these sorts of things. And the truth behind those types of adages is that the structures are created by humans, for humans, with a specific intent in mind at the time, and not always are they correct. And that's where the societal structures are not necessarily as fixed in stone as we think.
You end up seeing someone like Steve Jobs, who was very good at bending reality as to his own vision. And the most famous example is with the iPhone, in which he said that customers don't know what they want. I know what they want. And he was meticulous and perfectionist when it came to implementing that iPhone exactly as he wanted it in order to make that reality come true. He had to believe in it so strongly, though, to the point that he became the frame maker rather than the frame taker. Because smartphones that existed before Steve Jobs, it was the BlackBerry, which is extinct now.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Because someone with a stronger will and a stronger ability to put these things together and a stronger understanding of the fact that these structures are malleable, then malleabled it. He changed it.
Right. It is. Customers don't know what they want. That is true. They know what they want, but they don't know what they need. And another classic quote for this is Henry Ford, who said, if I listened to my customers, I would build a faster horse. The customer will ask you for what they already have because that's familiar.
Or a better version of what they already have.
A better version of what they already have. It's always gonna, and that's normal, right? And that's good because customers shouldn't be sitting there thinking about what the next product should be.
That's the business owner's job.
That's the business's job,
yeah.
Right? That's what they need to do. Now, to Steve Jobs' credit, he also was able to recognize when he was incorrect and change his mind. Not all the time smoothly. I think in his younger years, particularly, I already mentioned the mouse, insisting that a mouse only ever had one button. Moving on to the iPhone originally, it had to be a certain type of development environment. There had to be certain things. And they changed, they adapt, they improved it over time. But here's what's fundamentally important about the iPhone and a lot of technological devices. I think the revolution that we're in right now, the change that is going on around us, is that when you buy an iPhone, the day that you get it, it's actually not very useful. It can make calls, it can do basic things. But then you start adding apps, and you start adding more apps and changing apps. And then the apps get updated, and you add some different apps, and you change things around. And your phone gets more and more and more useful as you go along. So the day that you bought the phone versus what you have in your hand today are two different things. That was never true before, because what happened was if you bought a Nokia or a BlackBerry, it came with the email or whatever functions it had, and after 3 years, you had the same functions, just less battery life. Today, you still have less battery life, and you have all these other, physical, mechanical problems. But what's changing is that the phone is more valuable after you've used it than before you use it. And
as compared to like a car.
Right, exactly. And this is where Tesla, I think, is unique, is when you buy a Tesla, it is really just a computer on wheels, right? They update and change the features. So the day that you buy the car versus 1 or 2 years later, they're not the same. It's actually a better car 2 years after you've bought it. And that's something that I think Silicon Valley gets because they've been there for a long time. It's also fits in with what I saw with software is the computer stayed the same, but the manual pieces on it allowed you to make more out of what was there. So it's like there's that change, I think, is happening more and more. And it's all the things consolidating down onto reusable chunks. So where we used to have all these different computer programs on our computer in order to use all these different things. Today, a lot of the stuff we do is actually just through a web browser. So we have one computer program and the rest of it can be changed and updated and fluid. I think that trend is seeping out more and more into more areas. I think Tesla's a bit unique because they're a bit advanced in doing this in the car space. But Tesla is not a car company. And I think if you think it's a car company and you compare it to other car companies, you'd come to the conclusion that Teslas are overpriced and not really worth it. But that's because you're misunderstanding what it is. It's not actually just a car. And it's the same as what the iPhone did with the phone. When the iPhone first came out and people put it up against the BlackBerries and so on,
it was panned. I mean, people forget, but it was panned. People were like, no one will ever use this. Business will never use an iPhone. You know,
Probably look like a toy by comparison.
Yeah, you know, I need buttons in order to feel what I'm typing in, all these sorts of things. Like, people resist the change, of course, and they go, but what was critical about the iPhone, what made the iPhone, was the apps, right? The user the being able to scroll and touch, that's great, but every other phone can do that as well. What really makes the iPhone powerful was their apps and their app store. Now, Android came along, but Android, you know, iPhone makes pretty much all the profit in the mobile phone space. The Android came along, but the Android didn't really have the same coherence in the App Store and all these other, they misunderstood the apps. They thought that what mattered was the screens and the physical things was the focus. We can make it cheaper, we can have, you know, more memory, we can have removable memory, we can do all these physical features, but they misunderstood the store. In recent years, they've gotten much better, and they've turned around and realized that actually, you know, that's great and all, but to really make this phone valuable, it's in that software, it's in the apps, it's in doing those things. And so they've caught up, no question. And this happened quite a while ago, but you know, it's just an example. This, I think, is something that's going to happen more and more all around us. This, you know, some people talk about the Internet of Things and all this sort of stuff. I think the trouble is that today we buy a washing machine, we buy a drying machine, we buy a dishwasher, we buy some lights, we buy all these things. And it used to be that they're all completely separate, completely different. And then there was this trend to start making them smart, so they would have these endpoints and talk. But then there's a couple of companies who got it, like Amazon, and realized that, you know, you tie everything down to Alexa, and then the Alexa will control your lights, your washing. You can start to. That's the current technological wave that I think is happening. Is that we are getting to a point where we're really realizing that it's not just about constantly making bigger, better hardware bits. You know, we're going to keep making bigger, better cars or whatever it is. In reality, what's going to really matter is what can we then do to improve that internally. And I think that's, at least for the next 10, 15, 20 years, that's going to be a big trend that's going to start taking over a lot of the other areas and industries.
In the days before my dad died, you helped console me quite a bit, and you told me that I was in a lot of distress, and you told me that I have a human family that I can look to for help and support, and I really appreciated that. So thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for all the work you've done to make technology better, make the world better, and to talk about everything you've learned today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. I enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot, Alex.